Hello again, Strekpub. The Lycan Lacerator Werewolf Druid build for Diablo 4 is back and it's ready for launch. Lycan Lacerator 2.0 is improved. It's slightly different. This time, since I have the Mad Wolf, the Mad Dog build for a werewolf focusing on poison and having poison werewolf companions, this time around we're not using rabies because we already have one such build, and we're not using poison. We're leaning a little bit towards the storm skills, towards the lightning. We're using the storm shifter aspect. We're using hurricane that goes well with it. But the majority of the focus here is on the werewolf related skills, which is the crit bonuses and stuff like that. We also have fortify, we also have overpower, and overall, I think it's a fun setup worth testing out. And even though it's not using the obvious synergies with poison, it is still achieving some nice stats on paper. And hopefully not just on paper. Time will tell. Not much left until the game is here and we can play and test this build. So I hope you enjoy testing this one out if you decide to go for Druid first. Buckle up, Sturk Quip, and let's go. Let's start with the skill trees. As I did say, on paper the build is stacking some solid stats like 467.8% overpower damage, just to give you an example. And some of that comes from the skill tree, but the majority comes from items and from Paragon Boards. In the skill tree, I'm using Quo, I'm using Shred, I'm using Howl, which actually I maxed out Howl. I maxed out Shred and Howl. Everything else is just one pointers in terms of the major main active skill. Debilitating roar, not roar. Debilitating roar is something you could consider the switch me skill. Switch it to whatever you feel like. You could use Earthen Bulwark if you want. You could use Cyclone Armor. You can even use the Poison Creeper, the Vine Creeper, or Rabies if you want to dip into the poison element. But since I wanted to keep this different compared to my Met Doc build, I decided, okay, let's take a debilitating roar, and then there's this one aspect that works very well with it that makes it a werewolf skill. But yeah, another active, obviously, Hurricane with the Storm Shifter, and we're using Lacerate, the namesake of the build. And since it's a werewolf build, Wupine Ferocity um, works very, very nicely with Lacerate and in general with attack speed bonuses. Let's quickly show you why. First, that's the skill icons, by the way, of the skills if you need them. Let's show you why I took which. See, since we're not going into poison, I decided, okay, let's take this a chance to attack twice for Quo. And for our main damage source threat, we're taking the one with crit damage increase. Shred's second and third attack also performs a dash. In addition, Shred's crit damage increased by multiplicative increased damage. Again, if you want to dip into the poison, it's not a bad thing to do that. And again, it's not a bad thing if you want to dip into poison and swap out the debilitating roar and add something like rabies or like the poison creeper. In terms of passives from the core skills, Predatory Instinct maxed out, but we're not putting points into either Iron Fur or Lycanthropic Speed. As I mentioned, but how it's level 5. Not that big of an increase, but we still get from 20% to 26.8% max life. 6.8% max life additional might not seem like much, but consider comparing it to 20% max life. That is a solid chunk. That is like 30% additional um, extra max life. A little bit over 30% additional extra max life, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe my math might be wrong there. So debilitating roar for one pointer is good because first of all we get a solid amount of fortify, so we can have some survivability, some overpower as a result, and it also does a little bit of extra healing per second. Then ancestral fortitude, nice. But just one point is enough. We just need this for the vigilance, which I maxed out. Then no active, no passive from the companion skills, and then on Rat Hurricane with 1 point with the vulnerable upgrade. Then elemental exposure 3 points, endless tempest 3 points, electric shock 3 points, but 1 point into both charged atmosphere and bad omen, just so you can have this proc happening. It's a good 1 pointer there to just have it triggering every now and then. And this one, even with 10% chance, it's not bad to have bad omen. as a one pointer. Then the other stuff that you can see is that I took Lacerate again, and in the unique, I mean, no need to tell you that we're taking Lacerate with all the upgrades and why, but defensive posture. Increase the amount of fortify again from all sources, then tick height whenever you're stunned, knockback, whatever, fortify. And this one is crucial. Even if you decide to sacrifice tick height to put points elsewhere, Nature's Resolve, I wouldn't sacrifice that one. Chance to fortify when struck. Quick shift, just 1 point is enough so we can get the natural fortitude. Shapeshifting fortifies you. And then Wupine Ferocity is a great passive for this setup. As for the class mechanic, you can, as far as I know, you can specialize into one of the 4 categories and take 2 boons. And then in the other categories, you take 1 per category. I'm specializing in Ego for crit strike chance and crit damage. In Deer, I'm taking the reduced damage from elites. On Snake, there are 2 options. Either of them is a good choice, you have to pick one. One of them is Masochistic, which is critical strikes with shapeshifting skills heal you. The other one is Overload, which is Lucky Hit Lightning has up to 20% chance to cause the target to emit a static discharge, dealing damage to surrounding enemies. And then in the Wolf, I recommend Fortify for 10% of your life when you use a defensive skill. Considering we have 2 of them, it's a very good fit. For unique items, I normally decided to go for suggesting 4 items. With one being the major priority item. In this case, Mad Wolf's Glee is the major priority item, where Werewolf form is now your true form, and you gain +2 ranks to all Werewolf skills. I think this can go up to +4 if it's sacred or whatever, ancestral. So physical damage, poison damage, unfortunately something we're not dipping into, and damage reduction from poisoned enemies. So those 2 might seem like wasted stats unless you find ways to poison. And there are ways, again, there are many ways. If you want to dip into this, you can. But the physical damage by itself, and this one with all ranks and with the movement speed, is good enough to make it worth it. There are 3 other items. 2 of those are helmets, so obviously you can't have both of them. I strongly recommend the Harlequin Crest, the Shaco, for the damage reduction and 2 ranks to all skills, as well as cooldown reduction, maximum life. And the best, the cherry on the top of the ice cream is crafting material drop rate. If you're doing Hell Tides, this is a must-have item. Even if you decide that you like Tempest Roar more and you want to go for Tempest Roar, when you're doing Hell Tides, my recommendation is if you have a Shaco, use it. If you have a Harlequin Crest, use it. Then the Waxing Gibbous Axe is a great synergy. It's the shred item. If you want to be shredding, this is it. Gain stealth for 2 seconds when killing enemies with shred. Breaking stealth with an attack grants ambush, which guarantees critical strikes for 1 to 2.5 seconds. It also gives you, as it's an axe, one-handed attacks, damage to healthy enemies. It gives you crit strike damage to injured, life on kill, and ranks for shred. So in the best case, you would have the Mad Wolf's Glee, you would have the Hurricane Crest and the Waxing Gibbous equipped. So for the legendary aspects, since there will be need to sacrifice some of them when you get the uniques, I've tried to make it as painless as possible where I can. But in general, this is pretty much how it goes. Over here, it says Vasilis prayer. It's not Vasilis prayer. I meant this one, Tempest Roar. So you have in the helmet the Tempest Roar or the Harlequin Crest, but before it you're using the Dark Howl. Then for the amulet you have accelerating aspect, but that's temporary because this is the rearrangement here. So overcharged aspect, as you can see, goes over here in the gloves. But the moment you get Mad Wolf's Glee, the chest armor, this one means that the accelerating aspect moves from the amulet to the gloves, and it makes up some room for the exploiter aspect to go into the amulet, which makes room for the chest. This is the only tricky part, the only very tricky part. So you're scrapping overcharged. Accelerating goes in the gloves. Exploiter goes where accelerating was in the amulet, and that leaves room for the chest armor. For the helmet, it's easy. Just remove Dark Howl and put the Shaco or the Tempest Roar. For the axe, it's easy. You just remove this one. Remove the ring one aspect of the unsatiated and put the one that's in the one-hand attack slot, in the main hand slot, the retaliation into ring two, and that leaves room for the axe. Um, And that pretty much is how you rearrange them. But let's go and show you the rest of the aspects. First of all, you have stuff like Vigorous Aspect, Storm Shifter, Night Hour in the Ring 1. On the offhand, there's Storm Quo. And yeah, they are some fun, nice, interesting builds. So let's show you what each of them does. Night Hour, I love using on any druid build. It's good and your teammates will also love you for it. Bloodhowl increases crit strike chance by 5 to 10% additive. In addition, Bloodhowl also affects nearby companions and players for 3 seconds. Just for reference, it's 6 seconds for you, 3 seconds for the nearby allies. Stormclaw aspect. Critical strikes with Shred deal 20 to 30% of the damage dealt as lightning damage to the target and surrounding enemies. Overcharged aspect is Wacky hit up to 10 to X percent chance when dealing lightning damage to overload the target for 3 seconds and causing any direct damage you deal to them to pulse for an additional damage to nearby enemies. So more AoE, and if you combine this one and that one with the one from the spirit boon, I think it is overcharged or something. Overload. So if you combine overload with overcharged and stormclaw aspect, you would have some solid dipping into the lightning nature of the setup. So accelerating aspect is nice, very nice. That's why again we keep it in the amulet until it needs to be moved to accommodate for the exploiter. So core skills deal 20 to 40%. Critical strikes with core skills increase your attack speed by 20 to 40 additive plus 3% for 3 seconds. Then you have retaliation, which is your core skills deal 20 to 40% multiplicative increased damage based on your amount of fortify. And then we have exploiter, one of my favorite aspects. You have increased crowd control duration, and then you deal 20 to 50% multiplicative increased damage to unstoppable enemies, which for the majority of the boss fights, you would be fighting the unstoppable versions of the bosses, unstoppable stages of the bosses. Then aspect of the Dark Howl, the debilitating roar is now a werewolf skill, not also a werewolf skill. It shapeshifts you into a werewolf instead of a werebear, and it counts as a werewolf only, not as a werebear, as far as I've seen in the betas. In addition, it also immobilizes poisoned enemies. Then Hurricane, while it's active, you gain 2 ranks to your shapeshifting skills. A lovely, lovely item. I love using it on my druid builds. Aspect of the Unsatiated. After killing an enemy with Shred, your next werewolf skill generates 20 to 30% multiplicative more spirit and deals 20 to 30% multiplicative increased damage. And then Vigorous gain 10 to 50% damage reduction while shapeshifted into a werewolf. And if you already have the Mad Wolf's Glee, that should be almost all the time, and eventually all the time. The gems and socket recommendations are pretty straightforward. For the weapon, my usual top pick for almost every build is Emerald because crit strike damage to vulnerable is great. You can keep vulnerable permanently on bosses if you have your build right, especially if you play with other people who have vulnerable debuff as well. And every class can do vulnerable one way or another. Whereas something like critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemies, good for mobbing, not that great on bosses. There's also good stuff like the overpower damage from rubies, since this build has like over 400% overpower damage in its final form, just from the paragons and skills. Then it could definitely benefit from even more of it from the ruby. There's also additionally barrier ultimate skill damage for Lacerate with diamond, not a bad choice as well, but still not as great as the others. And then there's the life on kill, again very um, low priority if you really don't have the other ones. For the armor, I would recommend strongly Sapphire for damage reduction while fortified, or Ruby for maximum life. Since you're fortify and even barriers and stuff like that scales from max life, it's definitely good to have more of it. And bottom tier picks might be barrier generation if you decide to go for something that generates barriers, or for the healing received, because we do have Bloodhowl and some other things that could heal. And for the jewelry, diamonds, unless you need a specific resistance more than all resistance bonuses. I don't have time to, right now at least, I don't have time to arrange them by SWOT and priority for each stat for each SWOT, but I have sorted out 42 out of 300 affixes. And It's easy to remember them by remembering simple keywords. For example, damage, crit strike, chance, crit strike, damage is the top important words. Stuff like ranks 2, important keyword. Wacky hit chance, overpower, resistances, damage reduction, elites, shapeshifted, werewolf, fortify. But then there are those bonuses, those keywords to certain categories or types of skills, such as physical slash lightning skills, physical slash lightning damage. Core skills, very high priority for core and werewolf and shapeshifting bonuses and skills, whether it's crit chance, crit damage, or ranks to such skills. Lower priority goes on rat, nature, and storm as crit chance, crit damage with or ranks to such skills. And if you want to go ranks for a specific skill, shred top priority. Hurricane and Quo, both of those may be second priority, but how maybe third priority, and then debilitating roar, low priority. Still, you get some extra cooldown stuff from it, and it's not gonna be bad. But how it gives you more healing and reduces the cooldown with the extra levels. But obviously, shred should be the top priority. When it comes to elites, there is, for example, physical slash lightning damage to elites, or physical crit strike chance with physical slash lightning damage against elites. There's damage reduction after killing an elite. There's damage damage after killing an elite as well. And there is also damage reduction from elites, not after killing, but just in general. Then there's close enemies, crowd controlled enemies, and vulnerable enemies. So against those, you have crit chance, crit damage, and damage. But there's also something called vulnerable damage. While damage against vulnerable enemies makes you do more damage to the debuffed enemies, vulnerable damage increases the efficiency, the potency of the vulnerable debuff itself. And again, there's like damage WoW shapeshifted, WoW in werewolf form, specifying that form. And then there's stuff like WoW healthy, and then the fortify based bonuses. Overall, good bonuses through and through. There's this orange category is in white color in my spreadsheet. This is the higher priority, but not necessarily meaning that stuff here at the top is not necessarily better than this at the bottom. Whereas this thing here in golden in my website and with light blue on my spreadsheet is the lower priority ones compared to the other ones. For your convenience, I make two stages of the Paragon board trees, let's call them. So there is the maxed out all points spent stage with all the bonuses and stuff. In this case, I actually left 2 points. The last remaining points, you can put them wherever you want. And then there is the one that's kind of at a reasonable level. In this case, at level 87, if you have 0 bonuses from Renown, or if you have the 20 bonus Paragon points from Renown at level 82, you should be able to get to that stage. Now, let's go using this one and one by one show you the steps I recommend taking in what order to take the stuff. So, starting with this cluster here for damage and life, you're skipping on this blue one and you're taking the willpower on the way. So, you're skipping this one here, but you're going for the glyph. So, you're rushing the glyph, taking this willpower, int dex willpower, and putting werewolf, which at rank 20 gives you 9.6 increased damage while in werewolf form for every 5 willpower within range. And within range you can find 70 willpower. Right now we're only taking 55. We'll return for this 5 and this 10 later to get 60 and then 70. So after you take the socket, you can take that to willpower here and that to willpower here. Remember, each of those will grant you some plus X increase damage while in werewolf form. Obviously, it's not going to be 9.6 right away because you're not going to have it at rank 20 right away. You could alternatively, before taking those willpower notes, you can just rush here and take that damage, and damage in willpower. But then eventually you do need this willpower here, you do need those and so on. And eventually you leave that board and connect it to the constricting tendrils, which again, we're not taking it for the constricting tendrils itself, but we're taking it because in the close proximity here, there is nature magic skill damage if we decide to dip into it. And there's some other stuff around it. But overall, we take it for one reason, and that's this board has 49 decks around it. And we want the most amount of decks because we want to use Spirit as early as possible. Spirit gives you, at rank 20, 19.2% increased crit strike damage for every 5 decks within range. It also gives you crit strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from you by x2 for 20 seconds up to a multiplicative 12. So you approach the board from here. Very important to approach from here because this puts you one step closer to this damage to elites and nature magic skill damage, which we are returning later to take. Um, so on your way to the glyph socket, you go through here, and then Dex willpower, Dex willpower socket. After that, you want to take some easy decks. This is easy decks, and then after that you could probably go down life, life willpower, and then the 2-7 dexes, and eventually you can do willpower decks, and then strength decks. If you don't want to take the strength here, you can take the willpower, but a little bit of extra strength won't hurt. It's up to you which one you want to take. Either way, it works. I decided to go for the strength because some of those things require strength, and eventually you would have to probably min max and move things around. So if you take the strength, you take those two dexes, then the willpower and the dexes, willpower and dex, and then you exit through this way. Again, instead of going through the bottom way, go the upper way, so you're a little bit closer to this if you want to dip into it later, which I didn't, but in case. Now, it's important to go this way. Again, you're keeping yourself very close to this one, and dipping into this for attack speed and spirit is good. Just 2 points to connect it. So entering through here, int, and that implies that we want to put int here. Yes, this board is, mind you, this is the West for Carnage, and we will actually take West for Carnage because it only takes 5 points from the cluster to the actual legendary node. But before you do that, you go from here int, then you take the healing willpower, healing received int, and then you take the dominate socket in this one. And it's great. This is 28.8 increased overpower damage for every 5 intelligence, and this one gives you 54, so you can take it 10 times. 288% overpower damage just from this cluster here at rank 20. And you also get some extra bonus when you overpower an enemy. All damage they take is increased by 12 multiplicative percent for 5 seconds. After you take this intelligence here, and then you can take this one, willpower intelligence. Then you can do this willpower and take werewolf skill damage, werewolf skill damage, willpower, werewolf skill damage. And then there's intelligence here, 1 point strength, and then 2 more intelligence. And at this point, you could dip into West for Carnage, take it. I assume it's better to take it from this way because you're closer to this crit damage here, um, rather than this damage taken over time reduction. So I would suggest going that way rather than this way. And that means you can exit to the next board. This way I took a lot of willpower. And then we are keeping ourselves close to this. We won't need it, but in case you do, so we're taking this way here and entering. This is the board called Heightened Malice. Again, we don't need it for the legendary, just to get the glyph clusters and to be close to this, to those other stuff here, damage to elites and so on. So, entering through this way, taking the willpower here, this will be a dex board for us because we're putting territorial. For every 5 dex within range, 9.6% increased damage to close enemies, and if you meet the minimum requirement, 10% damage reduction against close enemies. I would recommend going that way. From this node here, you go dex, strength, dex, glyph. After that, there is one dex you can take here, and then there is this one. Damage to poison dex, damage to poison dex. I'm not a fan of damage to poison. It's useless for us unless we decide to find a way to poison, which there are ways to do, but they change the build. Then you go up here, willpower dex, and take that willpower dex cluster here, and then from here there's int dex, willpower dex. And it's time to exit and connect to the next board, which, as you can see here, is Ancestral Guidance. And at this point, I would go down, int, willpower, int. And this one is another where we're going for dex. This one can have 39. And we're putting exploit. For every 5 points of dex, 7.2% increased damage to vulnerable targets, very useful on bosses, with additional bonus. When an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds, and it cannot happen more than 20 seconds per enemy. The way I would recommend going here is this dex, willpower, and you can even skip this willpower if you want it and save yourself a point, and go for this one, the core skill damage, and then int here. And then you take this core skill damage, and then you take this core skill damage, and then you take this core skill damage, and then you take the willpower and then go for the exploit. Put exploit here, and then you take this dex, willpower, dex, and next it probably would be best if you go int dex and then this one. resistance to all elements, willpower, resistance to all elements, and then dex. And from here, that willpower gives you access to 2 more dex nodes. And at that point, it's time to fill. It is time to fill. And since I removed that 1 point from here, now we would actually have, let me show you the difference. We would actually have 3 points spare. The last 3 points, I'll leave for you to decide where to spend them. And there are options. But let's go through the important stuff. First, you come down back to this board. And you remember, we need to take this willpower. So you need to put that intelligence point here. Take this. And then this dex point here. This resistance, and then this 10 willpower. And then we leave that board again. So there are multiple clusters that are extremely easy and fast to reach. This one only requires 2 points to reach, and then you get attack speed 3 times, and then attack speed and maximum spirit. You don't need to put points into this and this unless you want to. Then there's this one. With 2 points invested, you get crit strike damage, werewolf, kill damage. Definitely something I would recommend getting as soon as possible. The whole cluster. And then if you look over here, there is damage to elites. You can take 3 times damage to elites, but you have to take one of those damage to poisoned enemies, unfortunately. And over here, just for 1, 2, 3 points to reach the cluster, core skill damage, basic skill damage, core skill damage, core skill damage, core skill damage. We don't need that second basic skill damage. And since you've already dipped here, might as well put some points to take this maximum spirit and life. And a little bit more points to take this spirit on kill, maximum spirit on kill. And then a few more points over here for this. After spending 75 spirit, you deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. If you want to save those points and put them elsewhere, you can just remove everything up until this point. Still take those. I wouldn't recommend removing those. But this spirit related stuff here, not needed. And this one, if you don't need it, there's other ways where you can spend the points, some of them more defensive. This cluster here as well requires only 4 points, and it gives you damage to elites, nature magic skill damage, damage to elites, and you have more nature skill damage, but you don't need it because it's only Hurricane will benefit from it. So other things that you can get, again, there's certain willpower nodes, intelligence, HP, the nature skill damage, spirit stuff. There's some danger reduction stuff nearby, healing damage, and so on. So with those last remaining 3 points, or if you decide not to put those close to like 15 points or whatever I've put there, you could put them elsewhere. And if you dip into poison, you have a lot of good stuff here for poison stuff to invest into. That would be definitely worth it. So I'll zoom out again one last time to show you quickly the differences between this and the first stage. And links to both of those will be available on the website and on the spreadsheet. To get notified when I upload more content like this one or other builds and guides for Wooter and not so Wooter games, you can subscribe to my channel and hit that bell button to not miss out on notifications. As well as keep in mind there's something called memberships on YouTube, which lets you be a paying member for my channel to get access to perks such as emotes and badges made by me, as well as the option to get one-on-one tutoring for the very basics of Adobe Photoshop, Premiere and After Effects. And memberships can be cancelled at any time if you no longer want to be a member. Thanks for watching all the way until the end. Struck up, keep it cool until next time, and goodbye.